Welcome into episode 381 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin on this beautiful Monday morning. Bridget and Scott, the Bruins, starting to hopefully salvage a road trip that started off as dismal as possible. They get a 5-1 win over in Vancouver, which, again, as I mentioned, hopefully they can start to turn a corner here on this road trip, but still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, it's a bit of an exaggeration to say that a game on December 14th is a must win, but this felt about as close as you can get. Like they desperately needed to play well, and I do think they needed the result as well. And they got both. In fact, it looked a lot like the last game against Vancouver and Boston when they played really well, controlled long stretches of play, but just couldn't score, couldn't beat Kevin Lankinen, and ended up losing 2-0. This time they got the finish. They actually converted on their chances. So, yeah, as I feel like we've been saying all year with this team, like now you have to build on it. Can't just be one game. But we'll see if they can. At the very least, they stopped the bleeding for one game, and as I said, gave themselves a chance to make something of this road trip.
Yeah, I'll start with my opening shift, which was basically how the start of the game transferred into just a consistent game that I think most people would agree felt like the Bruins controlled most of the time. And so it starts with a goal by Marchand on the power play. And the reason why that goal was important was, first of all, like they had been in holes the last two games. Like the holes just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So they started out with the first goal, which was helpful. And it came when Marchand was getting booed every time he touched the puck. Is able to score on a really nice backdoor pass. And he kind of quieted the crowd, which, by the way, it looked kind of empty there. Even when the game was only 1-0, there was certain chunks of the stands that didn't look like there was a whole lot of people there. But anyway, I digress. It was just important for them to get the first one, important for it to come from the captain. And I think that, and you'll get more into this as well, Brian, like the captains, like the guys wearing letters, had good games. Pastrnak was one of them as well. Marchand was one of them. And it drove the offense, and it got them back on track with their first win on the Western road trip.
Yeah, exactly, Bridget. And last game was an example of how this offense goes oftentimes as David Pastrnak goes. David Pastrnak with a 4-point performance, a goal and 3 assists of just one shot on goal. So that's a pretty good shooting percentage there for Pastrnak. Obviously, we're used to him getting more shots on goal over the course of a game. But again, 4 points, that is him taking over the game on the score sheet, no matter which way you look at it. Alongside with him, Bridget, you alluded to it, but Marchand is in on the Marchand and Pastrnak, both in on that opening goal, as is Elias Lindholm on the power play. So and Pavel Zacha had a 3-point performance. So Pavel Zacha is up to 16 points in the year. It wasn't too long ago where we were talking about, look at Zacha and Coyle, how they're both on pace for like 15, 20 points this year. Well, Pavel Zacha has officially taken his name out of the hat of massive underperformers. Like he's at 16 points. Somebody like Coyle's still down at 9. So I think Zacha's on pace for 40, 41 points, half a point per game pace. But if that offense can continue to climb, maybe he can get back to, close to what he's been in his first 2 years in Boston. But my opening shift, as I said, the offense goes as Pastrnak goes, and it's no surprise they win 5-1, and David has a pretty solid night on the score sheet.
Yeah, and my opening shift, and by the way, I also want to tease, we're going to answer some mailbag questions later in the episode. People have been sending those in, even though we didn't call for them. So we figured today is a good chance to get to some of them after we talk about the Canucks game. But my opening shift is not about the Canucks game. It's about something that the Bruins did earlier on Saturday, which was they claimed Oliver Wahlstrom off waivers from the Islanders. So he now adds to the right wing mix, and obviously the player that they're bringing in, hoping that a change of scenery will do him some good. You know, that there's obvious talent there. He was the 11th overall pick back in 2018. Kid out of Maine, went to Boston College. Bruins fans will remember his mini one-on-one goal when he was 9 years old, the spinning lacrosse style goal. But he has struggled the last couple of years with the Islanders, and this season only had 2 goals and 2 assists in 27 games before getting waived. So, you know, his shot and kind of offensive creativity is this calling card, and is what is going to have to show up for him to be an impactful NHL player. He's still only 24 years old, so, you know, not a lost cause or anything. So you understand, you know, what the Bruins see and why they might want to bring him in and take a look. But it will be interesting to see what it leads to elsewhere on the roster. You know, does this mean Mark McLaughlin goes back to Providence? What does it mean for Tyler Johnson? Like, I think Wahlstrom and Johnson are kind of similar in terms of the roles that they play, where they probably have to be on one of the top 3 lines. Neither one of them is really a 4th liner. You know, does this mean that, tying into, you know, one of the questions we got, does this mean that like Poitras and or Merkulov and or Lysell now get stuck in Providence longer because now they're behind Oliver Wahlstrom as well? So I think lots to get into there, and, you know, we will as this episode goes on.
Yeah, I feel like the first thing I thought of was Poitras. And Johnson. Johnson, it was like, okay, he might be out of a job. And Poitras, it was like, okay, we just talked about how he might be deserving of a call up, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Obviously, the last podcast that we did, we were talking about could one or more of those guys get called up, and nobody got called up. And instead, it was this move to add Wahlstrom, who got waived. And I don't know if the Islanders just didn't expect someone to grab him, or just that was it. They're kind of you know, okay with him parting ways. But
yeah, that they had Matthew Barzal coming back from long-term IR, so they had to do something, and I think they waived Pierre Engvall as well. So I'm sure they knew there was a chance someone would take a chance on Wallstrom.
And it seemed like Boston was probably who they were worried about the whole time because of the connections. And I was seeing, you know, people tweet and talk about, oh, hey, maybe this, you know, this could happen in Boston, because before it ever happened, it seemed like that was the biggest chance of him landing somewhere was Boston. But correct me if I'm wrong, Scott. I haven't seen when he's supposed to join the team yet.
He should have been arriving either Sunday or Monday. I think he's expected to be with them by Tuesday's game in Calgary. Now, obviously, we don't know if that means he's playing Tuesday in Calgary. They might want to get him some practice time first, and they do have a practice on Monday. So, you know, we'll that'll be like Monday afternoon our time. So I guess we'll see then if he's on the ice with the team.
So, Scott, I think this is a fine place to start just because it can be a bit of a quick hitter here. So I saw a lot of people online before the Bruins officially claimed him when he was still floating out there on waivers. Some thought, why bother bringing him in when we should just see what our younger players in Providence can do? Like, why it seems a little bit redundant. I would just say that it's not really fair to Wahlstrom to say that, because at 24 years old, he does have 71 NHL points to his name in 220 games. Georgi Merkulov, a player that those would be clamoring for to get this opportunity over bringing in Wahlstrom, same age, 24, and he has, you know, the 1 assist in the NHL to his name. So let's not lose fact at just how young Wahlstrom is compared to some of these players in Providence that we're talking that the Bruins should give a chance to. I mean, Wahlstrom has, he might have some inconsistencies so far in his NHL career, but at least he's had an NHL career at the same age as some of these players. Now, granted, Poitras is significantly younger. Fabian Lysell, 21 years old. This is one of those times where you sit there and say how Wahlstrom's only 24, Merkulov is only 24. And you look up Fabian Lysell, and you kind of expect him to be like 22 or 23 because he's been around for so long. He's still only 21 years old. So that it also kind of reassures you just how young Lysell is as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, it's not exactly redundant to bring in Wahlstrom because he's a younger player that's shown that he can perform at this level, which is something that the other Boston prospects, aside from small sample sizes from Poitras, we can say that about.
Yeah, I was one of the people on Twitter who was a little skeptical about the idea of bringing Wahlstrom in, and basically for me, what it came down to is I think there's a project here. Like I think there's kind of a lot that Wahlstrom needs to get turned around in his game if he's going to take off. And look, if you put in the work and eventually get that out of him, then I guess it probably pays off. But I don't feel like he's going to come in and be like an instant help for this team where you plug him into your middle six and all of a sudden you get an offensive boost. Like I think his game needs more work than that. He's really struggled, and like he was getting healthy scratched at times. And again, like I said, like there's not enough versatility in his game to play him on the fourth line. Like if he's not scoring, there's really not much else that he's bringing to the table. So maybe the change of scenery alone, kind of a bit of a homecoming, like maybe that does something. But I just look at it and like I worry about, okay, now you're going to devote a roster spot to someone that you have to work with, and it's probably going to take some time. And like, is that really what this team needs right now? Like, I feel like this team needs more instant help, like more, and that's where I look at, like, at least guys who have been in your system, like, are playing the way that you want to play, know the system, know what they need to do, right? Like, if you call Poitras up, there's a chance that does provide an immediate spark because we've seen it from him as a Boston Bruin before. Whereas Wahlstrom, I'm like, all right, what if this takes like a month or two to get him kind of to where you want to get him to where you're comfortable playing him even 12 or 13 minutes? Like, I just don't know that this team's really in the position to like have the patience to work on what I think is going to be a longer term project, but maybe I have it wrong. Maybe he does, assimilate much quicker than that.
Yeah, and Scott, what is the rule for acclaimed player? Like, is there a certain amount of time you have to let them be in your NHL program before you yourself waive them? If you like, if it doesn't work out?
No, you can waive them whenever. But I will clarify, what you can't do is you can't send him to Providence. He would have to go through waivers. So, he's on your NHL roster.
Yeah.
So Scott and Bridget, can I ask you guys to elaborate just a little bit more? Actually, well, first, before I do, so Bridget, how do you feel? Because I was going to ask Scott, and I want you to answer this too, Bridget. Is it because when you're describing Wahlstrom as a project and needing work, and I'm not here to disagree with that, but I would say that's exactly what we're talking about with even Poitras, to be honest with you. But all those guys down in Providence that are, people are saying should get a chance at some point. The difference is Wahlstrom has shown at the same age as a lot of these guys that he can produce at this level, play at this pace. Maybe, or maybe you're saying, Scott, because he's struggling at the NHL, maybe it's easier to be worried about Wahlstrom because you've seen him struggle at the NHL level, but you haven't seen Lysell struggle at the NHL level because he hasn't gotten that chance. Maybe that's playing in factor too. But would you say you're more comfortable with a Lysell or Poitras or Merkulov simply because of systemic familiarity? And then Bridget, I also haven't gotten your opinion at all on the difference between the players.
Well, what I was going to say, what I was getting at with when I said that, is there an amount of time you have to keep them? Like, what I was getting at was there's minimal risk if it doesn't work out. It just, he ends up in the same, it sucks for him. Like, he ends up in the same situation. He gets waived. Maybe someone else claims him. Maybe he ends up in Providence, which seems like it might be the case. Like, maybe the Bruins were the only ones interested. And maybe if his stint with Boston doesn't work out, maybe he gets waived. Nobody claims him this time. He ends up in your system as some organizational depth, which wouldn't be a bad thing. But there's not a whole lot.
I will say there's also, I forget the exact rules. So I won't go too in depth without looking it up and having the exact answer, but there is a period of time where the Islanders could just take him back and assign him. Like if the Bruins put him on waivers and no one claimed him, the Islanders could just take him back and put him in the AHL. Like they would essentially have the right to do that before you did. So like say the Bruins waived Wahlstrom today and no one claimed him, like the Islanders could take him back and send him to the AHL instead of you sending him to the AHL. Like that's what happened with I forget its name, but the goalie that they claimed from Vancouver at the end of training camp and brought in for like 2 days and then waived. Like Vancouver just took him back and sent him to the AHL.
Yeah, I remember that. That was
yeah, the poor guy had to fly across the whole continent twice in like 4 days.
Yeah, but anyway, this is all part of the conversation. Of course, important to bring up like what the risks are for doing all of these things, including waiving him again. But I think that the thing that makes me optimistic about the addition is the fact that the Bruins were lacking creativity, and maybe this is something that sparks creativity. And I wouldn't say any of the guys, like, I wouldn't say it'd be a terrible thing to send Kastelic back to the fourth line, let him, work with Kepke and Beecher, and maybe McLaughlin rotates in. Maybe we don't see Johnson. I don't think any of that's the worst thing in the world. And maybe you put Wahlstrom on the third line and he adds some creativity to the mix. I do not know his background with the power play. I don't know if he could be an asset in any way on like a second power play unit. But
yeah, certainly his shot can be a weapon. Yeah,
these are all things that make it worth the attempt at the very least, because there's not a whole lot you can do to the roster in season. And Brian, this was what we were talking about last episode. I think it was you that asked the question, like, what kind of shakeup does this roster need? What could they do mid-season? And we're talking about hockey trades, but here comes along a player who, if you believe, can get back to somewhat of the player he used to be without giving up anything. I don't see why not try that roster shakeup and see if that infuses anything. It to me seems like I thought the news was good news. Whether or not it becomes a reclamation project that's difficult or easy or somewhere in between, still worth shaking it up, because I don't think anybody that's listening to our podcast and anybody sitting here recording our podcast thinks that they are the perfect roster on paper, coming in, and that shakeups aren't needed.
Yeah, I guess like what worries me is, are you even going to have enough time to like really figure out if he is a good fit or if he can be? Again, like if he comes in and like right away, it's just like, wow, switch flipped. He looks way better than he did with the Islanders. Like, we got something here. Great. Like, that'd be awesome. But Bridget, like everything you're talking about in terms of, hey, he has some offensive creativity and maybe he can help on the second power play unit. And Brian, you said, like he's played in the NHL and has experience. I'm like, yeah, you know who that sounds like? It's Tyler Johnson, who we're sitting here after 3 months saying like, geez, maybe he's not a fit. And like,
yeah, but I think there's a clear difference that the age is a factor.
No, but I'm not talking about age, to be clear. I'm saying like you brought in Tyler Johnson for like all those same reasons. He had a full training camp with your team, like has been around, has been practicing with you.
That's more like on him. I think that's more on Johnson not being able to execute. I mean,
okay, but I guess what leads anyone to believe like Oliver Wahlstrom's going to be better than Tyler Johnson, because he hasn't been at the NHL level. Like even last year, Tyler Johnson was better than Oliver Wahlstrom.
Well, I would so a couple of things. Number one, I can't sit here and say he would be more effective than Tyler Johnson, but we also can't say that Merkulov or Lysell could be either. I think Poitras is the only one down in Providence that like we all feel, would be better over all these guys, right? So let's put him in his own category. Scott, I would just say that these other prospects besides Poitras, we would have the same questions about, but even if your fear is realized, I guess what's is it that detrimental? Like if it's a failed experiment, like it could just kind of wash your hands with it.
No, it's not. And like I want to make that clear. Like I'm not saying this is the end of the world or like anything like to get worked up over. I just don't. I feel like it's not. I feel like there's not going to be enough time to really figure out what you have. Like
It's
if he
a desperate move,
doesn't
Scott.
click right, yeah, like if he doesn't click right away, then again, like what are you giving him? Like, is he just going to practice with you for a month as your 13th forward, but you can't play him in games because you don't really trust him? Like, I guess I just don't. I'm skeptical of how this actually works out unless it is just like instantaneous. He's found his game.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. Like I think that's why it's kind of going to be fun to watch, because it's look, there's no doubt about it. It's a desperate move. It's a desperate attempt at offense from Don Sweeney. Like the Bruins they're not in a position right now where they, you guys said it. Like this isn't a hockey trade, but it's an NHL. We'll call him an NHL caliber player. I think it would be disrespectful to say he's not an NHL caliber player. He's got over 200 games to his name. You're able to bring him in. You're not giving anything up. It's a desperate attempt. It's a low risk, high reward type move, and it very well may not work out. But Don Sweeney's sitting there being like, "Oh, I gotta try something." So come on in, Oliver. One other
That's
question.
almost as good as your Krejci impersonation.
Oh, thank you. One other question for you guys, because one of you mentioned Koepke. I forget, Bridget. I think it was you mentioned Koepke on the fourth line. Max Jones is a player down in Providence that is starting to rev up his engine a little bit. Do you think there's opportunity for him to be a third player on a fourth line with Kastelik and Beecher at some point? Or are you just like, no, like let him keep earning it, and I see no reason to bring him up right now over a Koepke? Or has somebody like Koepke kind of plateaued a bit? What do you guys think about Max Jones just kind of heating up down in Providence, even if it's just his energy game?
Yeah, I mean, regardless, like it's good to see, and it's a positive because it at least keeps him in the picture and makes it clear, like, okay, he could still be an option. It's not. It wasn't a total bust in the sense that it's like, wow, we just have nothing here, and he's just gonna waste away in Providence the rest of the year. So it's good to see. It's good to have that as an option. I don't know if you need to, bring him up right now. Like, I have no problem with making him earn it for a little bit longer. But yeah, I do think so. We kind of touched on this in the last episode. It's like I like a lot of things that the fourth line is doing, and we all knew they weren't going to keep scoring at the rate that they were to start the year. But until McLaughlin's goal, and look, Koepke's driving the net, and is the one who puts that defender in a bad spot to have McLaughlin's shot go off him. So yeah, Jones playing well is good to see.
I think I may have lost connection, Bridget and Scott. So I think maybe Bridget, did you hear everything Scott said? It was just me.
I heard like a little bit of what Scott said.
Oh no! So wait, is my connection?
No, I thought you both froze for me, so I thought it was me.
Everything went dark for me, so I don't know what it was, but we'll
It might
mark
have been the program. It might just be the program. I can try to.
Yeah, we can mark that at 24. But Scott, I think we got the general gist of what you were saying. It's good that he's playing well, and could be a future option. And if things don't go well, if that fourth line just continues to kind of not have a full identity and not create much offensively.
Yeah,
although
Mark
did score a goal.
Right. If it didn't come across, that's what I eventually got to, was that it was good to see them score because I think they needed that. They were playing good defense. You still need a fourth line that occasionally can pop one. And Cole Koepke had the net drive to back the defender up. So
and Now, we talked about this last episode, I think, but McLaughlin I think this was his 8th game, and he probably gets sent down before 10, right? Because then he has to go through waivers. So maybe there's
Yeah, he's at 7 games played now. But he's also approaching the 30 days up. So this, I think it's the 22nd, this coming Saturday or Sunday, whatever that is. Yeah, so he basically has through the end of the week until either he gets sent back down, which unfortunately for him is probably the most likely scenario, or he stays up and is probably here a little bit longer term because they wouldn't want to expose him to waivers.
So the inspiration behind my Max Jones question is because I just feel like Max Jones and Mark Kastelik as 2/3 of a fourth line, probably with Beecher, is probably something that Don Sweeney had in his mind when acquiring these guys to be bull and china closets, especially against a potential playoff matchup against a Florida or something like that. And I look at the fourth line with Beecher, Koepke, and McLaughlin, and that's a far cry from the chaos of a fourth line that I kind of feel like Sweeney wanted in the first place. And I'm wondering if he's going to try to get back to that at some point mid-season to give it room to grow before the postseason. So that's why Max Jones has been on my mind, and of course, some of our Providence Bruins friends or who cover the team have been posting a lot of him, and so he's looking better. I just thought it was worth bringing up as we approach the new year here. Bridget and Scott, we do have some mailbag questions. Were there final takeaways? We haven't really talked much about the game, actually. The Wahlstrom stuff went a little bit longer than I thought.
We didn't talk at all about the game, really.
Yeah, not at all. Just with the opening shifts.
Well, look, to build off Brian's on Pastrnak, like a huge game for him. He was dominant, obviously, with the goal and 3 assists, and such a big change from Thursday night in Seattle. He sets the exact wrong tone with that double minor high sticking on the first shift of the game. Comes out Saturday and sets the exact right tone and just takes over. And the 2 primary assists to Geeky and Zaka, both nice, especially the pass to send in Zaka. And then the wraparound finish was nice for his goals. So I'll start there, but I do also want to touch on the power play goal as well, which ties into Bridget's opening shift a little bit. I don't know if you guys had any opinion on Pastrnak.
Well, I was going to say this is his highest producing game of the season. 4 points. That's the most he's had. His setup on Geeky's goal was, we talked about this before we started recording, but I thought it was a wraparound try that just bounced the right way for Geeky to score. Scott thinks it was intentional. Maybe it was a little bit of both. But either way, he's doing the right thing, and then eventually scores on a wraparound later. So it ends up working out just fine. Geeky scores, and I thought Lindholm had a good game too. Not to distract from Pastrnak at all, but sometimes I watch games and I'm like, okay, where does Elias Lindholm really fit in? We're still kind of gauging what that addition could mean, especially if they start playing better, especially if Lindholm starts playing better. And he's starting to, you're seeing the playmaking ability of him, especially in a game like yesterday against Vancouver, and just hoping the scoring starts to come for him too. But you watch and you see how he's so much more of a pass first guy and like a setup guy, which on paper, when he came in, we were like, oh, perfect. Pasta can finish anything, and Lindholm can pass it to him, and it's going to be easy. Great formula. It hasn't worked out like that, but you do see the playmaking ability from him. This time it was setting up Marchand's goal, not Pasta, though.
Yeah, I think Lindholm, all eyes have been on him since the start of the season with the contract that he signed in the offseason. And despite getting a couple of goals early on in the year, he had a very, very slow start to this season. And to this point, still a relatively slow season production-wise. I do feel like when all is said and done, over the next couple of years, Bruins fans will think of Elias Lindholm more fondly than they probably have to start the first 3 months of this season. We have to understand there are a lot of off ice things that come into play here too. You've moved your family from Calgary to Vancouver and then across the continent to Boston in the off season. You're finding a new home. I think he had
married and had another baby.
yeah, had another child. You're getting used to a new system, new teammates, new environment, new life outside the rink. And I think
Get injured on the first day of training camp.
yeah. So it just, it's we have to give a little bit more mindfulness to maybe the outside of the hockey stuff that goes into, your production at work. And I think that he will settle in at some point, hopefully. that would suck if he doesn't.
Well,
I also feel like some of that in terms of like what fans feel about him longer term probably also comes down to like whether or not they ever actually find, a true number one center, which I've never really felt like Elias Lindholm is. And for everyone who says like, well, that's what they're paying him to be, like, they're not. Like, true number one centers get 10 million plus. He's getting 7.75, which in two or 3 years is going to be just like normal money for a second line center. And if at some point Elias Lindholm is settled in as a good number two center, yeah, I think everyone's going to be pretty happy with that. The problem comes like if you still can't find that in years to come, and you're still 2-3 years from now asking him to be your number one center, and he's okay but not quite good enough, like, it's almost like unfair to everyone. But that's obviously the position that the Bruins are in right now, is they still don't have a true number one center.
Yeah, and I think we didn't bring this up yet, but we thought potentially he was injured after the previous game. He left about halfway through the game. Like he missed the whole final period. We weren't sure what his health situation was, but he comes in and he plays. Zacha as well. We weren't sure what his health situation was. He left the game with about 10 minutes left in the game and didn't come back. Didn't play another shift, and they both end up playing in their normal positions, both on the top power play unit. Still didn't really seem to be slowed down. So whatever it was, maybe they were just banged up, a little bit sore, and then by the time they got to puck drop in Vancouver, they were feeling fine. So that's big, because losing those two guys would have been really hurting your top six forward depth and center depth in particular, and what would have prompted a call up. And that's, I think, Scott, you tweeted this. It was like, well, there's been no call-ups yet, so that probably means one or both of them are healthy and good to go, and they were, and they both contributed.
Yeah, and they knew pretty early, because everyone was in Providence's lineup Friday night, and if there was even even if they're like going to be game time decisions, someone would have been up or would have at least been held out of Providence's game. So that's good that obviously it's not anything more serious with either of them. Last thing I want to say on that power play goal, guys, look what happens when you have good movement. Like, they had Vancouver's penalty kill could not keep track of everyone. You have Marchand starting at the left point, moves the puck to Pastrnak, then goes diagonally to the right doorstep. Elias Lindholm starts at the net front, pops out to like kind of the low left side to take that pass from Pastrnak. Pavel Zacha. Now, I don't know if this was intentional or not. I hope it was, because it's a really good play if it's intentional. He starts going into the bumper spot, and then as Marchand also moves through the slot, Zacha curls away, and you could tell that there's a Canucks defenseman there who looks very confused as to whether he should be going with Zacha back out to the right flank or Marchand, and he ends up not going with either, and that's how Marchand ends up wide open. So I'm like, if that was intentional, that is great play design. If Zacha was actually trying to move into that area and then was like, oh shoot, here comes Marchand, then it was just a happy accident. But either way, really good movement. Got the Canucks confused.
We did get the Bob Ross reference in after all.
Yeah, there was good movement, Scott. and there was purpose. They knew what they wanted to do with the puck before they got it. Now, that power play in particular got off to a bit of a slow start. It was kind of sloppy, ironically, before that sequence took place, and it was a good keep by McAvoy, and then they were able to settle in. So, fortunately, they were able to rectify that power play and feel good about themselves. Bridget, it's a great point you make about Lindholm and Zacha's availability last time we recorded. As you guys talked about, that was a question mark. So that could have been an opening shift right there, because that's a huge bullet dodge to, lose what would be your top two centers right now. And then, as you mentioned, Bridget, they both produced. They combined for 4 points. So that's a big development. And then my last comment, just to jump back to Scott's Pastrnak commentary, is that it wasn't too long ago that he was on pace for like 70 points, which was down 40 from last year. Not nearly good enough. He's still not on pace to do what he did last year, but right now he's on pace he's a point per game guy right now. 32 points in 32 games. So you play that out, he's a point per game guy, and we have to imagine that he's going to start feeling more confident, and the production will start to come in more in bulk. So you'll get some more 4-point games to 3-point games, and that will boost his pace up to hopefully around 95 to 100. And then if he can really get hot and get back to what he was last year, then that's great. Like, I don't think we've even seen a multi-goal game from him yet this year.
Nope. Yeah, he's up to 13 points in his last 9 games, and that's with 10 of them being assists. Like, shots still not going in the way that we're used to from him. Shooting percentage still way below his career average. So, yeah, that shooting percentage comes up. He goes on a hot streak. Like, yeah, all of a sudden you are talking about, he's going to be a 1.5 per game over a 10, 15, 20 game stretch, and he's up over a point per game for the season. So, yeah, that's still the next thing. But, like, the production, whether it's goals or assists, has definitely been there recently.
All right. I think now's a good time to transition to some of your listener questions, and we appreciate them as always. So first, we're going to start with Paul. And Paul brings up, Bridget and Scott, how last episode there was some conversation about some sloppy practices throughout the year. Brad Marchand alluded to having not good practices. They saw a couple bad losses coming. And we've talked about on the podcast how practicing has not been their strong suit this year. So Paul pretty much asks if Kim and Don might take advantage of the open assistant coach position and maybe give one Zdeno Chara a call.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be Zdeno Chara. I don't think he has a whole lot of interest in that. I do think we could see an assistant coach come in at some point, and obviously, Saka would have some say in that. I think they want to give things a little more time to kind of shake out and figure out, like, okay, where do we feel like the pressure points are where we could use help, and make sure they make the right hire rather than just kind of rush into it and be like, okay, we're going to bring in so-and-so and we'll figure out exactly what they do later. Like, I think they want to figure out exactly how this staff, as currently constituted with Sacco, Jay Leach, and Chris Kelly, is going to operate, and then they'll figure out, okay, like what's kind of the hole that's still left that needs addressing. Bless you, Bridget.
Thank you. Yeah, I get the sense that they're before the end of the regular season, like they are going to fill that hole, that open hole, based on the comments that Sweeney made at the press conference immediately following Montgomery being fired. And they could use some help. Obviously, most coaching staffs have a full complement. The Bruins are currently down a guy, and I don't know if you guys have an opinion on what you think that they could use in that role. Something that, maybe a guy that could focus more on the power play, or they were doing better defensively, but maybe you bring in a defensive guy. I think that's what Paul's question is about. Like, can Zdeno Chara come help the defense? And just because of his pedigree and what have you, though I think he is very busy in his daily life and training for marathons and having family, and who knows what he's up for these days. But I'm sure he would be a great coach, but might not be what he wants to do.
Well, I think Cam Neely, Don Sweeney, Jeremy Jacobs, Charlie Jacobs, every Bruins coach and player, every Bruins fan could want Zdeno Chara to be their assistant coach. I don't think Zdeno Chara has watched more than a couple of Bruins games this year. I think, I've seen him on like behind the B episodes or just different media posts where he's catching up with people. And I just don't think he's ready. I think to what Bridget and Scott have mentioned, he's just the Bruins and the NHL is just not really on his radar at the moment. I think he's got other things going on in his life. So I don't think Zdeno Chara in particular, even if everybody else wanted that to be the case,
Or like Bergeron either. I feel like
is realistic. Yeah, at least Bergeron's probably more like in tune with what's going on with the team. I don't think like maybe it was Chara on the that Nesson broadcast. What's it called? Obstructed Views. Is that what it's called?
Is it unobstructed views?
Unobstructed Views. I think he made a comment on that about how like he hasn't really had time to watch. So I don't think Chara's the option this year, but who knows in the future?
Razor.
Bridget, I think like the power play specialist is like the right direction to be looking. Especially, if struggles continue, things don't really look a whole lot better. Like just a fresh set of eyes, a new voice could be, just someone to come in where it's like, okay, we're going to do something a little different, or you're going to hear a little different message. Like it feels like that could be ultimately where this goes.
I mean, I don't understand the Chris Kelly power play assignment. I mean, I know there's a counter argument to be had. We've talked about it before, where sometimes you have a player who was a penalty killer facing power plays his whole life as a killer, knowing what is tough to play against. So just because you're not a power play guy when playing doesn't mean you aren't credible. But it just hasn't. The numbers just speak for themselves. So I don't. That's definitely. Yeah, I agree with what you guys just talked about. Moving on to the next question, we have Sam. I'll just kind of get right to the nuts and bolts of what she's asking. Where would Poitras play if he were to get called back up? She does mention about, Zacha, Lindholm, Coyle were supposed to be your three centers, and Lindholm was your number one center. On paper, he's probably going to be more of a two center. I think on this team, it's all about what the roster is. So on this team, I think he's still penciling as a number one center, but she says how that could be conflicting with what they have for Poitras as his long-term plan. So where does he fit in this roster when he gets called back up inevitably?
Yeah, I think it's still at center. And I wonder, with him playing more minutes down in Providence, working on his conditioning, friend of the pod, Mark Giver, has tweeted and written about how he thinks he can see Poitras in better game shape now than when he got to Providence. Things like holding up better later in shifts, being able to extend shifts effectively, being better later in games. If that, I feel like that's some of the stuff that was keeping him from moving up in the lineup in Boston and playing a bigger role. It's just that he was wearing down. And so you're not going to give more minutes to someone who is struggling to even handle 14 minutes. I wonder, if he can build up and does improve his endurance and conditioning and all that, does he come back up into more of a top six role where, Charlie Coyle kind of feels locked into the third line at this point, where he's still not doing enough where you're going to be like, okay, we're going to move Coyle back into the top six. So if Coyle's kind of locked in at number 3 center, I wonder if Poitras, if there's a spot for him in the top 6 that maybe bumps Zacha back to the wing. Do you see a Zacha, Poitras, Pastrnak line? Morgan Geekie goes down to the third line, which I think is fine. I don't think anyone feels like Morgan Geekie needs to stay on the top line, even though I feel like that line has done some better things than people give it credit for. I'm still not going to sit here and be like, Morgan Geekie needs to stay there. No, of course he doesn't.
And Brazeau has also been in the top 6 and could be a bottom 6 guy.
Yeah.
So there are definitely options, and I've liked when it was Zaka Patra Pasta, as hard as that is to say sometimes. You can't say that very quickly or you mess up, but I've liked how that's looked, and he would definitely be better off if while he was in Providence, he has increased his stamina and can take those bigger minutes, because obviously Pastrnak is getting a lot of minutes, and you're going to want to keep them together if that's the plan and that's where he comes back up. But I think the question too was basically almost insinuating a little bit like, is there a spot for him to come back up? Like, is he kind of blocked into Providence right now, and maybe finds himself a little bit lower down the pecking order of call-ups or of guys that are going to be on the active roster come the end of this road trip.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Charlie Coyle is not really, secure as a center on this team right now. I mean, I think that Mark Kaslick has taken the majority of those center draws in the third line. So yeah, I mean, I think, if you move Kaslick down to the fourth line, I just don't see Charlie Coyle as, as being an effective center to this point this year. So, if there's ever a time for Poitras to kind of slide into a center ice position, Charlie Coyle can still be a winger, somewhere else. I mean, that's what he's been, right? It's almost ironic how it's kind of worked out where Poitras's been down in Providence, and even still Coyle's been moved to the wing at many points.
Well,
And I think we mentioned this last podcast.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit like within shit. I do think for the most part, even if Kaslick takes the draw, it defaults to Coyle handling center duties, Kaslick more on wing.
But there's vulnerable, but his position's a bit vulnerable. It's more vulnerable than it has been, with Poitras in Poitras's tenure so far. I mean, last year Charlie Coyle was their number one center. I mean, as was Zaka. They kind of split that, but it's a much different situation right now with Poitras on the roster. You get what I'm saying. There's opportunity there. It's not as set in stone as it has been.
Yeah, and we mentioned this last episode, I think, but Poitras was on a 5-game streak with goals.
Well, now it's
6.
6. So yeah, so he's just continuing to make a case for himself to come back. Hopefully we see him soon. I think I speak for a lot of people when we just, we want to see him come back and see maybe what he's changed in his game and how he could help the team. But maybe it's still a longer term thing that they're keeping him down in Providence.
Well, it feels like it's probably at least through this week, right? Like that, I don't think they're calling him up mid road trip, for the final 2 games, flying him across the continent. Like that doesn't seem likely, especially now with Wahlstrom joining the group. Lindholm and Zaka are okay. Like they're not going to miss games. So it at least doesn't seem like it's going to happen until the weekend. And then at that point, you're only 2 games until Christmas anyway. So like, are we now looking at after Christmas? Like I could see that easily.
Yeah, like the 21st and the 23rd are the 2 home games the Bruins have before the holiday. So but it's not like Providence is so far away that it's like, oh, it's such a hassle to call them up. Like you can just drive up 95 to 93.
I don't know. Depending on the time of the day, that drive is a real hassle.
Kind of, yeah.
One stat that the Bruins organization has over every other team in the league that's not talked about enough is the organizational depth in Italian restaurants and neighborhoods. If you're in Boston, you got to walk to the North End for some good Italian food. And if you get sent down to Providence, I guess I'll deal with Federal Hills food for a little bit. So Italian cuisine, Boston has the best organizational depth in the NHL, I would say. Then you get down to the ECHL and the Maine Mariners. Maybe not so much, but at least Boston and Providence.
Yeah, that's more of the seafood pipeline.
True.
Exactly.
True. Boston has some good seafood too. I don't know if I would say Providence does. I live very close to Providence, so I know the drive well. It can be a pain in the butt, but still, I mean, we can get them back up here. It would be no problem. But by the way, that reminded me, Trent Frederick was on What Chaos talking about what he used to eat when he played in Providence, and it was not Italian food from Federal Hill. It was like Dunkin' breakfast sandwiches every day for like the entire time he was down there.
It's always so funny to like hear from athletes that like eat like the college version of us. Like I forget what NFL player it was, but someone was same thing, was like on a podcast, and he was like, "Yeah, my first like 2 years in the league, I would just eat like whatever fast food was between my place and the stadium." And it's like that was his diet.
Well, speaking of Providence, Bridget and Scott, let's jump on down to Kim's question. And basically, she enjoyed our discussion about the Bruins training camp and their practices, their practice habits this year, just not being the most intense. She saw somebody on Twitter talk. I'll read the quote. It says, "What frustrates me about the quote, there's no push from Providence conversation, is that there is zero consideration that the Bruins organization has not fostered an environment for these guys to fight for NHL spots." So basically what Kim is referring to is a conversation online about the Bruins had a week training camp, they have week practices, and there's not really an environment in the Bruins culture where players that aren't on the Boston roster get rewarded for strong training camps. They get sent right back down because, NHL players under contracts, they're just kind of their spots are safe, and it leads to a lack of it just leads to maybe some complacency for some of the NHL players and not true internal competition. So this is just a general topic I guess we can discuss about the culture in Boston. I think it's changed over the years. Like, for a long time, the Bruins were a Stanley Cup contender. So it's really tough to push through there. I think the last couple of years in particular, there may be some more opportunity that you haven't really seen as much of, even despite having a lesser NHL roster.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always on the side of like pushing back against this narrative because I am more of the belief that like the bar should be high for young players to break in. Um, and I think the Bruins have allowed young guys to do that. Like Matt Poitras and Johnny Beecher made the team out of camp last year. They were not on anyone's like penciled in depth chart going into training camp. They stole spots from older players. Mason Lohrei, went down last year, but then was up pretty soon, was up multiple times throughout the year. Poitras made the team again this year out of camp. So like I think those opportunities are there. I don't like, yes, they have a higher bar than other organizations, but again, that's because their goal is to contend every year. So like they're not rebuilding where it's like, well, we're just gonna throw the kids in, let them sink or swim and give them every opportunity. Like, no, they have a high bar. I think they should. But they have made room for younger players who have earned it. I just think that standard is probably higher than what a lot of fans want to see. That bar is probably higher. I think there's more fans who feel like, if you have a couple good weeks, like you should stick around and never be sent down. And I'm not really of that belief. Like, I don't like the okay, like yeah, they had a bad camp, and yet Fabian Lysell still didn't take advantage. So, like that's an example where it's like the opportunity was there for Fabian Lysell. Like he had every opportunity to make this team. There was a wide open hole at right wing. He didn't take advantage. Like that's not the Bruins' fault. Like that's obviously like his development in part is on them. I get that, but like that's a young player who had a chance and didn't take advantage of it.
Yeah, and to like talk about why this is different besides just the rebuilding thing, like then Macklin Celebrini getting game time and Cutter Gauthier and Will Smith, like those guys are also a different caliber player. Those I would say that those guys are above. Macklin Celebrini was the number 1 overall pick. Will Smith, I think, was 4th overall. Cutter Gauthier was 5th overall. And those are guys that are getting time because they're on bad teams and organizations are like, hey, at the very least, come down and watch our guys that are going to be good in the future. And by the way, I saw the shade that Will Smith got on the Jumbotron the other day. At the
that was brutal.
That was so bad.
Completely unintentionally, but
I know they put Macklin Celebrini up and he's sitting next to Will Smith. Those guys do everything together. It seems like now that they're not rivals anymore.
I know Scott and every other BU fan was chuckling when they saw that.
Okay, but Will is a really good kid. Like, he's a nice kid. And he's just, it doesn't deserve this.
Well, and you could even see like Celebrini was like sheepish about it, where it's like he didn't want to like, because you think they're at a Golden State Warriors game for people who didn't see it, but you would think like, hey, like, stand up, like pump your fist, whatever, cheer on the team. And he's kind of just like, does this like shy little wave. And it's like, yeah, because he also realizes like, this is awkward. They're not, I'm sitting next to one of my teammates and they're not putting his name up.
Yep.
Guys, on the question though, specifically, I do want to also mention, like, under Cam Neely and Don Sweeney, the Bruins did have a youth movement. Like, I remember to start the 2017-18 season, the watching the Bruins that year, you were like, oh wow, there's a lot of young players. I mean, at the time, you had a rookie Jake DeBrusk, you had like a second year Brandon Carlo, third year David Pastrnak, or fourth year, but he was still only like 22. Danton Heinen, you had first full year of Charlie McAvoy, Matt Grzelcyk. I remember watching that Bruins team and being, I think Ryan Donato came up later in the year. Anders Bjork was on that opening night roster. So that opening night roster against Nashville back in 17-18, the Bruins opening night roster was very young, and not all of those players I just mentioned were first round draft picks. I mean, but you get my point. So that was an NHL opening night roster that had a significant youth on it that was overseen by a Don Sweeney, Cam Neely training camp. So it has happened. Yes, there's also younger players that haven't broken through, but to Scott's point, they have to earn it. I mean, Fabian Lysell had a very, very lackluster training camp for the second year in a row. So, there is an element of like, you have to kind of, knock the door down like emphatically. And that's what Poitras did last year.
Well, yeah. And I would also go back to start of the 2020-21 season. And again, like, obviously some of this is necessitated by salary cap and all that, but Bruins had two openings on the left side of their defense and had the door wide open for any combination of Jeremy Lauzon, Urho Vaakanainen, Jacob Zaboral to kick it down. One of them could have claimed a top 4 job. They started that season with Lauzon McAvoy as a pairing. There was also like a third pairing or extra defenseman job. And those guys all got playing time. They all got looks in training camp. And it turned out none of them were top 4 defensemen. Like, Zaboral hung around a few more years. Vaakanainen gets dealt in the Elias Lindholm trade. Lauzon, they lose to Seattle. But it's like, there was a ton of opportunity for those guys. They got NHL playing time. They just weren't really good enough to be top 4 defensemen on the Boston Bruins. And, so that kind of bringing it back to Bridges' point, like, that also comes back to caliber of prospect, which when you don't have high draft picks, it's hard to hit on real top of the lineup type of players. So that's also why, these guys don't get the ice time of, a Celebrini, Smith, Gauthier. It's like, they're not that caliber of prospects. So
what Scott would do to have Macklin Celebrini in Boston still?
It'd be incredible. I mean, he is so good. Like, he's having such an awesome rookie season.
So, Bridget and Scott, because this was an impromptu mailbag due to listener engagement, despite putting out the bat signal, I do want to reward everybody who sent questions in. So there's 2 more, and we'll try to get through them as quickly as possible, okay? Because we only have so much time left. So let's go right to Liz. The first one, the Bruins making Merkulov a permanent winger. That could just be a quick yes or no from either one of you. I think he's been playing wing a lot, but I'm not too sure.
They're at least they're doing what I wanted them to do, which is if you're going to play him at wing in the NHL, which they did the last time he got called up, play him at wing in the AHL. And he is now. He's been on a line with Poitras, a very productive line, the two of them and Vinny Lettieri on their right. So, yeah, I think they at least want to take a look and see, like, can he be a good left wing? Does this make more sense in terms of, like, is that going to be his best way to actually potentially stick in the NHL? So I don't know if they've decided, like, he's definitely a full-time winger now, but they're taking a look, which is something I think they should do.
Yeah, I'll just leave that as my answer too. So
okay, I think the next one we've kind of touched on. I think it's tough to play fortune teller, but I think we probably might expect them to try to make a hockey trade at some point, even though they did just pick up Wahlstrom. I know Elliot Friedman talked about on Hockey Night in Canada that teams are very interested in Trent Frederick. In the essence of timing, I think we'll probably we've talked about this, so we'll just kind of maybe, unless you have any thoughts on this, but we can maybe just go to her third question. And Bridget, I'll ask this for you to answer this one. Basically, it's talking about leash with younger players. How would you respond, Bridget, to Lohrei getting scratched when having a tough game, even though Peak played bad with him on that pairing, as opposed to, just putting him with like a Carlo or a McAvoy? How would you respond to leash on some younger players?
I thought that Lohrei had played pretty poorly, and I don't think that it's the end of the world to scratch him once and then bring him back and hope that maybe it's a lesson or maybe he learned something from sitting up. I'll call it the ninth floor. I have no idea what it is out west. What other, I don't know where guys sit in other rinks. I assume it's something similar. We call it the ninth floor because that's exactly where it is.
In Calgary, it might be the catwalks.
Yeah, the catwalk, just sit up there, see from a different vantage point, directly above the ice. But no, I don't think it was terrible to do. I think it was fair to do. I don't think he'd been playing well enough. I understand like the sentiment of, well, Peak also was bad. I mentioned it that podcast before he got scratched. That pair was hard to watch. But if the question is, are we just putting him in situations where he's not set up for success, and like, should he always be with McAvoy? I mean, maybe there's more of an argument to that, but at the same time, you got to find ways to get other guys going too, like Zadorov. Putting him with McAvoy is an option, and moving. I mean, apparently Osterley McAvoy is a pair too that you can roll with. But yeah, I don't think it's unfair to scratch him just for one night. It's not a huge punishment. It's a small, short-term thing. And I don't know if you get the same benefit out of doing it to Peak to send a message, but I think for a young kid, maybe he learned something from it.
Yeah, I think that this also connects to like a sentiment I see a lot from fans is that like you have to put young players with like your best players. And I'm like, that's not really how it works. Like young players have to learn how to play with everyone and in multiple different situations up and down the lineup. Like, I'm sorry, like Mason Lohrei's best spot may very well be with Charlie McAvoy, and that may very well be the Bruins' best top pairing option as we go on here. But if Mason Lohrei can only have success playing with Charlie McAvoy, then Mason Lohrei is not doing a good enough job. Like, Lohrei should be able to play with Peak or Carlo or Wotherspoon. Again, I'm not saying he has to be as effective as he would be with McAvoy, but you're not going to be with Charlie McAvoy every single game, every single minute. Like, you still have to find a way to be effective with other partners. So, and same thing with Poitras. Like, yeah, he might be great with, like, I'm sure he would look better with David Pastrnak. Everyone would. But Matt Poitras also has to be able to, play effectively in a third line role. Like, that's part of breaking into the NHL, especially on, well, what's normally a good team, and still might be a good team, but like that's part of career growth.
Well, that's a good segue, Matt Poitras, is into our final question from Mark, who says the Elias Lindholm signing is just not working out. They thought they were getting a 1C to help Pasta. Instead, they find themselves with a struggling 2C, who so far has shown zero chemistry with Pastrnak. This year, Poitras has shown he has more chemistry with Pastrnak and Lindholm. So the question is, do you think they try and trade Lindholm for a player that might actually help the Bruins, or is the contract Sweeney gave him simply too large, or would Sweeney's ego get in the way of that? Because if the Bees do that, he would have to admit it was a poor signing that simply did not work out. Before either one of you guys go, I'll just add, I believe, without looking it up right now, I think Lindholm has a full no move for like the first 4 or 5 years of his contract. So I don't even know if this is possible just by stating that part, but I'll let you guys elaborate.
Yeah, it's not. He does have a full no move. He's not going anywhere, at least for several years. And if you're Don Sweeney, like it's not ego that would get in the way. It's the precedent that would set. Like, good luck trying to sign free agents going forward if you're trying to force a guy you just signed into a trade 3 months later. Like that's just not. It's not a good way to operate. Like, yeah, maybe Elias Lindholm does turn out to be a complete bust, but like you need to give this a little more time. Yeah, I can't imagine any general man, maybe Chris Drury, some of the stuff he's doing in New York, but I can't really imagine any general manager is going to operate in a way that, 3 months in, you're trying to force a new signing to waive a no trade.
Yeah, that sounds very backstabby.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when you're in contract negotiations with Zadorov and Lindholm, you're talking about guys that want to find a home where their family can kind of build up for the next stretch here. Like they don't want to bounce around. I know we talked about Zadorov bouncing around. One of the main things that he said when he came to Boston was finally felt like I picked a place that I can stick around and maybe have a life here and not move. And that's the stability is a main reason why both of those guys signed in Boston. They were promised long stints here and they don't want to move again. So it would be a big backstabby move to even attempt to do that. To me, for a lot of reasons, it won't happen. It shouldn't happen. But one of the main ones is also we're still very early on in the Elias Lindholm experiment and experience, maybe would be the better word than experiment because he's going to be here for a while. But he's not the only one that's been underperforming either. So, and also you'd be trading away something that you need, like you need top 6 forwards, and you're trading away one if you're getting rid of him. And maybe you're getting one back in this hypothetical situation, but they're already so short in that category that of scorers or guys that can make plays that it just wouldn't make sense on a lot of levels.
Yeah, I think the best way to look at this Lindholm thing is that we're all looking at him as a 1C. He was brought in to be a 1C, and that's just because the roster is not. It was lacking, and it still is. He's not a 1C, and to Scott's point earlier, he's not being paid as a 1C. So, the majority of his tenure in Boston should be him as your 2 or 3 center. Like, he could be your 3 center in 5 years, if or less, if Poitras your 2 guy. But the big question mark is that 1 center position. Where do they fill that? Do they find? That's the thing. It's a mystery, and unfortunately, the Bruins are putting their fate in the hands of other teams around the league, because the biggest way you get a 1 center is through draft and development. Ideally, a higher draft pick, which they don't have too many of those. So then the Bruins might be saying, okay, could there be some theatrics around the league where there's a 1 center like a Jack Eichel in Buffalo, where somehow a 1 center is on the move at some point. Or like there were rumblings about JT Miller in Vancouver. I think those have probably quieted down, but there are situations out there that we just can't think of right now because they probably haven't unfolded that might present themselves for the Bruins to kind of get a shortcut to a 1 center. But besides that, it's tough to, there's always free agency too, again, but I just
hoping Zacha was a shortcut to the 1C at some point as well. I mean, his contract is very reasonable.
I just think Bruins fans
maybe it's Tage Thompson in Buffalo, although I don't think he's as much of a slam dunk as Eichel. You hear rumblings about Dylan Larkin in Detroit, although both Larkin and the team have shut that down. And again, like Dylan Larkin, I think is a really good player, but he's not like a star. So yeah, look, Bo Horvat got traded. Again, like he is a 1C, but not an elite one. So, the other way to go about it, obviously, is if you're loaded on the wing, you can carry having, Lindholm and down the line Poitras as your top two centers if you're loaded on the wing. Well, right now, you have Pastrnak, obviously, an aging Marchand, and then Geeky and Brazeau as your top six wingers. Like
Sounds good to me.
That's not loaded on the wings. So like that would be another potential shortcut is like if you bring in one or two more, star or just really good wingers, that can help elevate the center position.
Yeah, it's a good point. We just don't know. But what I would say to Bruins fans is, you really can't look at Lindholm long term, his contract long term as like a number one center. He's not going to be that for the Bruins. I mean, maybe this year, technically, maybe next year, but I can't imagine the Bruins are going to go more than 2 years with him as the 1C on their depth chart. They're going to try to find something, some way. All right. We have a hard out here in a few minutes, so I think that probably wraps it up. Thank you all very much for submitting your questions and for staying up late to watch these West Coast games. Only a couple more, so we'll get through it. And of course, the following morning, just tune into the Skate Pod and we'll be discussing. So thank you all very much for listening. Bridget and Scott, thank you, and we'll talk to you all on Wednesday. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.